My story of losing Henry. All our stories are created for entertainment purposes only. Sometimes we end up in serious trouble because we do things under pressure or to please friends. I'm not sure what got into me that day, but a small mistake I made cost me my man. What's worse is that I don't even know the main reason he suddenly lost attraction to me. Picture being told straight up that he lost interest because of one silly mistake. I acknowledge I shouldn't have done it, and I wish I had handled things differently, but I couldn't. My own foolishness led me to lose him. Trying to please people or seeking validation, whether from friends or family, can sometimes land you in hot water, making you lose yourself in the process, along with your happiness. Imagine losing someone you thought you'd spend your happily ever after with. Someone who suddenly loses interest. I know others may have been through similar experiences. Please share how you dealt with it without losing yourself in the process. Here's my story. I'm a 24-year-old woman, and I met my boyfriend, Henry, a 28-year-old man, at a festival in Times Square. When he saw me with my friends, he asked one of them about me since they already knew each other from high school. I decided to join them because he was going with his friends, and Polly, who was also a friend of mine, had known them from high school. We thought, why not? After all, the more, the merrier, right? So we happily joined their group, and it turned out to be an absolute blast. Now, even though I consider myself an outgoing person, I'm not as naturally bubbly as my friends. I can be a bit reserved, especially when hanging out with people I don't know well. That's when Henry, our group's organizer, introduced himself and his buddies. I have to admit, it was a pretty epic encounter. Henry and his friends were not only funny, but also full of life. They had this infectious energy that lifted everyone's spirits. As the hours passed, the noise level from our group grew. So Henry politely asked if he could speak with me privately for a moment. I had noticed him stealing glances at me throughout the festival. So naturally, my heart began racing and curiosity got the best of me. I couldn't help but wonder what he wanted to discuss. Despite his undeniable charm and good looks, I couldn't help but be a tad cautious. You see, I had this nagging suspicion that Henry might be one of those guys who dates girls for the thrill of it, only to move on when he gets bored or finds someone else more appealing. I hesitantly agreed to our private chat, and Henry initiated the conversation by showering me with compliments. He expressed a desire to see me again after the festival, suggesting that we spend some one-on-one time together. While I couldn't deny his charisma, I couldn't help but maintain a healthy dose of skepticism. I couldn't help but feel skeptical about Henry. I mean, we had only met for a brief moment, and he was already suggesting a date. It seemed a bit too hasty for my liking. So instead, I decided to give him my phone number. Going out with him the very next day after just one encounter felt risky. What if he turned out to be some kind of serial killer? It was wiser to start getting to know him through phone conversations first, to gauge what kind of person he truly was before considering a solo meetup. After all, there are plenty of unpredictable things happening in the world, and I couldn't afford to take unnecessary risks. 2 days later, he texted me, and we began chatting extensively. To my surprise, I discovered that he was actually a very decent and down-to-earth guy. Yes, his appearance might have given off a player vibe, but as they say, looks can be deceiving. And in his case, they definitely were. It taught me not to judge a book by its cover. Despite the 4-year age gap, he was 22 and I was just 18. With me still in high school and him already in college, we clicked. Henry had a great sense of humor and he was quite intelligent. Plus, he had this romantic side to him that was hard to resist. He knew how to treat a woman right. So after a few months of building our friendship and growing closer, we both couldn't hide our feelings for each other any longer. Henry decided to confess his emotions, and that's when our journey together truly began. A relationship blossomed, although Polly had reservations. She warned me that Henry might lose interest or move on once he'd had enough of me. I initially thought Polly was just being envious of my relationship with Henry, but it turns out she was genuinely looking out for me. At that time, I had distanced myself from our friendship. I have to admit, I do regret not heeding Polly's advice, but what's done is done, right? We had been dating for 3 wonderful years, and everything seemed perfect. Henry was not only handsome and charming, but also genuinely kind. I had fallen head over heels in love with him. However, one unfortunate night, I let my guard down and made a mistake that would haunt me for weeks to come. My friends and I had planned a girls' getaway trip because we wanted to have some fun and get away from home for the weekend. While I lived with my parents in Bryanston, I would visit Henry's apartment from time to time. Our relationship was filled with bliss, happiness, and profound love. To be honest, I couldn't quite fathom the real reason why he suddenly became disinterested in me. I knew that my minor slip-up wasn't enough to make him lose interest all of a sudden. Our relationship had seemed so promising and perfect. I had even introduced him to my parents, and my mother had grown very fond of him. They embraced him like one of their own, but it seems I introduced him to them too early. The girls and I embarked on a weekend getaway to Dubai, and it was an absolute blast. The trip turned out to be everything I had wished for: sun, sand, and endless enjoyment. However, on the third night of our excursion, I made a small error. We made some new friends who were also on holiday, and we joined their parties, having an incredible time. No one was babysitting anyone. We were all adults capable of looking after ourselves. Consequently, I had a few too many drinks. Meanwhile, Henry was acting strangely and making me stressed out. He seemed off and cagey, but whenever I asked him about it, he would just get angry. I believed he might be dealing with something significant and needed space to handle it on his own. As time passed, his behavior worsened, leading to frequent arguments. I began to suspect he was cheating because whenever I visited his apartment, he acted strangely or went out with his friends. It felt like I was in a relationship with his apartment, given how rarely he was home. Our physical connection was also dwindling. He'd lose interest abruptly during intimate moments. Thankfully, the girls' trip to Dubai helped me unwind and temporarily forget about Henry's undisclosed issues. While in Dubai, we encountered a group of friends who were there to celebrate a birthday. They invited us to join their celebration, some bringing their girlfriends, while others came solo. I missed Henry, but I refused to let his problems ruin my weekend getaway. So I pushed aside my concerns and lived in the moment. With one too many drinks, I felt carefree and silly, eventually dancing on the table and belting out songs at the top of my lungs. The guys in the group laughed and cheered me on, and I relished the attention. I allowed my carefree and joyful side to come out. Amidst all the dancing and merriment, I noticed a guy at the bar of the club we were in. He had captivating blue eyes and a charming smile. He stood there, watching me intently, and I couldn't help but be drawn to him. I knew it was wrong, but the allure was irresistible. He continued to gaze at me with his alluring eyes. I decided to take a break from dancing and headed to the bar for some water because I was feeling quite tipsy. As I was getting my cold water, this guy named Michael came over and introduced himself. Surprisingly, he seemed even more charming up close. To be honest, I didn't have much confidence in my dancing skills, but when I'm in the moment or a little tipsy, I somehow managed to move my body. I don't recall the specifics of our conversation, but I do remember feeling alive and carefree for the first time in months. It was an exhilarating experience, though thoughts of Henry did cross my mind, accompanied by a twinge of guilt. Deep down, I loved Henry, but he was going through some tough times. The details of what transpired are a bit hazy. The next morning, I woke up with regrets, a pounding hangover, and a sense of dread. I knew I had messed up, and the thought of confessing to Henry terrified me. I had betrayed his trust, and the fear of his reaction haunted me. I tried to push these thoughts aside and enjoy the rest of the trip, but the guilt and shame lingered. While lying there, I heard a knock at the door. It was Henry, and he looked furious. I was taken aback because I thought I had left him behind. I couldn't fathom how he had made it to Dubai. Instead of giving me an answer, he decided to slap me in anger. It was shocking because I had never witnessed Henry this furious during our entire time together. He wanted to know what had gone down the previous night, and I was completely baffled because I couldn't recall anything from that night. Perplexed, I questioned him about what he meant, and that's when he unleashed his rage, demanding the truth from me. Under the pressure of his tantrum, I finally spilled the beans. I explained that the girls and I had gone to a club and were invited to a party by a group of guys celebrating their friend's birthday. However, I intentionally omitted the part about the handsome guy I had encountered, knowing that it would only make matters worse. Desperate to divert the conversation, I started questioning Henry about why he had traveled all the way from New York to Dubai and how he had found out about our guest house. I suspected that someone had tipped him off, possibly one of the girls. It didn't make sense that someone from the party group could have had the time to live stream and reveal our location on social media. Henry warned me to come clean with the truth, or he'd uncover it himself, forbidding any attempts to change the subject. In that moment, I realized I had no choice but to confess, even if it meant potentially ruining everything. He whipped out his phone and displayed a video of me dancing on that club's table. It felt excruciatingly embarrassing, witnessing myself groove like I'd lost all sense. There was no way to deny it. I'd been caught red-handed. I braced myself, sucked in a deep breath, and spilled the whole story. I recounted our nightclub visit, the encounter with the stranger, and my awakening the next morning. Henry sat there, his expression morphing from anger to seething rage with each word I uttered. When I wrapped up, he abruptly rose, pacing the room, his hands trembling with fury. He fired questions at me, some so difficult that I didn't know how to respond. I feared that answering might further stoke his anger, leading him down a regrettable path. I knew Henry had his share of anger and trust issues, stemming from his troubled family history. Despite undergoing therapy, I'd assumed he'd changed for the better. But you can never truly gauge those who excel at concealing their true feelings. He wanted to know why I'd done what I did, expressing how he believed our connection was something special. However, he doubted his ability to ever trust me again after my actions. His words pierced my heart deeply. I had no retort. His words left me shattered. I recognized the magnitude of my colossal blunder and the slim chances of our relationship surviving this ordeal. It seemed like a mere 0.1% chance, if that. I knew I'd inflicted pain and disappointment upon him, and I was overwhelmed by profound remorse. I pleaded with him, begging for forgiveness, and making empty promises to never repeat such a blunder. Deep down, though, I knew those words were mere echoes. The mistake was done, irreversible. My frustration grew toward the person who captured that video of me dancing on the club's table. I felt a burning need to unearth their identity. Their thoughtless actions had wrecked my relationship with Henry. I also had to uncover the informant who disclosed the location of our booked guest house. I had believed I had unwavering friends, but I'd been blind to the snakes in our midst, a realization that struck me all too late. In the subsequent weeks, Henry distanced himself from me. He ignored my calls and texts, a clear punishment for my transgression. Despite my efforts to reach out, he remained unyielding. During this period, I managed to identify the culprit who'd leaked our guest house location and sent the video of my tabletop dance to Henry. Shockingly, it was one of the girls whom I'd thought of as friends. She sent it to my former friend Polly, who had Henry's contact, and Polly, in a spiteful move, forwarded it to him. I couldn't fathom the betrayal. I'd believed these girls had my back, but they turned out to be treacherous backstabbers. Furthermore, I learned that one of them had nurtured a high school crush on Henry. They had attended the same high school, but he'd never reciprocated her feelings. She wasn't even friends with Polly back then. Her jealousy and envy had driven her to sabotage my relationship with Henry, all because of an irrational infatuation. After weeks of begging and attempting to reach out to Henry, he finally returned my call. I felt a mix of happiness and hope, believing he was getting back to his old self and forgiving me. That hope, the one that whispers, "You can relax now." He reached out, so it must be something good. Little did I know my hope and faith were leading me astray. I held out hope in vain because he asked to meet up with me, or rather, he invited me to his apartment. Unbeknownst to me, he was preparing to drop a colossal and devastating bombshell. I went confidently, even taking the time to groom myself and don new lingerie, thinking it would be a reconciliation meeting. My heart brimmed with hope, despite what my envious ex-friend had done. Upon arrival, he didn't seem thrilled to see me as I expected. I brushed it off, attributing it to the early hour. I knew he could be grumpy upon waking, not in the mood to chat with anyone, so I understood. He acknowledged my response to his invitation, then got straight to the point. My heart pounded against my rib cage. Fear gripped me as I dreaded what he was about to say. He didn't mince words. He told me outright that he had lost attraction to me ever since he received the video of me dancing on the club's tabletop and my story about the guy I saw there. His words were piercing, breaking my heart. I tried apologizing and pleaded for another chance to make amends, but he just flat out said he couldn't and wouldn't be with someone who didn't respect herself. I'll admit I messed up and got a little too flirty with that guy I saw at the club, but we didn't go very far, and we definitely didn't make out. All we did was some kissing and light touching, nothing more. As for dancing on that table, I was just letting loose and having a good time, but it ended up costing me my man. One foolish night, one stupid mistake made while I was drunk, and it all took my love away from me. It's crazy how one silly night could wipe out 3 years of a relationship, isn't it? I wish I could turn back time, but Henry had also been distant, avoiding conversations with me at times. I was so stressed about him that I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. I wanted to forget how he was treating me, even though I was his girlfriend. As much as I was in the wrong, I couldn't help but blame him for pushing me to make that mistake. After he said everything he needed to say, I went back home with a heavy heart, shattered and devastated. I had never felt so low in my life. It was as if I had let myself down and ruined my own life. I'd always been the perfect girlfriend, always prioritizing my boyfriend's needs over my own. I couldn't comprehend why he would just toss me aside like that, as if I meant nothing to him, as if our relationship meant nothing to him. I felt like a part of me was gone, like I had lost something vital. How could one mistake mess up a chance at love like this? It was hard to grasp that the person I'd loved so deeply had just thrown me away like an old used tea bag. I was deep in denial, struggling to accept that Henry was no longer with me. After a few days, I tried reaching out to my ex-boyfriend, hoping to understand what went wrong and why he ended things, but he simply ignored me, blocking me on all social media and ignoring my calls and texts. It felt like he'd vanished from my life completely, and it crushed me. Weeks went by, and I was left to piece together my broken heart on my own. I spent days in bed, unable to eat or sleep, just staring at the ceiling, wondering where I'd messed up. I felt like I was drowning in my own tears, suffocating under the weight of my grief. My parents were concerned, taking turns checking on me, but I couldn't even face them. I felt as if the shame of my mistake was written on my forehead, exposed for the world to see. Depression started to consume me. I had no friends, no boyfriend, just myself. I cut ties with all my former friends, unable to trust them anymore. They'd revealed themselves as fake friends, not to be relied on. They were like poisonous snakes, ready to bite and leave you with scars and deadly venom slowly consuming you until there was nothing left. I retreated further into my shell, isolating myself from the world. Every day was a struggle, and it felt like I was sinking deeper into a dark abyss. I couldn't see a way out of this pain, and it seemed like the world had turned its back on me. My parents were worried sick, trying to get me out of this pit of despair. They encouraged me to seek professional help, and eventually I relented. Therapy became a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in my otherwise bleak existence. It was a slow process, but therapy helped me cope with the guilt, shame, and heartache that had consumed me. As time passed, I started to rebuild my life. I rekindled relationships with my family, slowly mending the bonds that had strained during my darkest days. It was a challenging journey, but I was determined to heal and move forward. I learned a valuable lesson about trusting the right people and making better choices in life. The scars remained, but they served as a reminder of my strength and resilience. Life had dealt me a harsh blow, but I was determined to emerge from the darkness stronger than ever before. Those were my friends back then. After sulking in my room for 2 weeks, I finally decided to snap out of it. Hosting a pity party for myself wasn't going to mend my broken heart, bring Henry back, or erase the mistake I'd made. So I came to realize that I needed to get back on my feet and move forward. I couldn't rewrite the past, but I could shape my future. I also started therapy. It wasn't an easy road, but I gradually started to mend. I shifted my focus to my own needs and desires, rather than constantly trying to please my ex-boyfriend. I explored new interests and hobbies, such as painting and hiking, discovering a newfound sense of purpose and happiness in my life. Before even considering another relationship, I knew I had to heal completely. I needed to learn how to control temptations, especially when it came to alcohol, before I could think about dating again. Though I knew it wouldn't be like what I had with Henry, I knew I had to keep moving forward. The bond I shared with Henry used to be something I considered special and rare because of how deeply we cared for each other. But I messed it all up. As time went by, I slowly began to feel like my old self again. There were still moments of sadness and regret, but they became less frequent. I had learned to release my grip on the past and embrace the present, and I could see a brighter future ahead of me. My parents were pleased with my progress, so I decided to start a small business to avoid being stuck at home all day. Given my qualifications in interior design, I decided to dive into that field. Starting from scratch wasn't easy, but I managed with the support of my parents. While I was still on my journey of healing, I started noticing other men showing interest in me. I had always been confident and outgoing, but now I felt like a shadow of my former self. The idea of dating again made me hesitant, fearing that I might end up hurting someone else. I didn't fully trust myself to commit to another person. My heart still longed for Henry, but I knew I had to move forward and find love once more. Months later, I crossed paths with a man named Jonathan. He was a kind, funny, and handsome guy. It felt like he saw something in me that no one had noticed in a long time. We started going out, and I found myself falling for him. Jonathan was different from Henry. He wasn't perfect, but he was genuine. He had his flaws and imperfections just like everyone else. And as I got to know him better, I realized I didn't need perfection. I just needed someone who was authentic, someone who would love me, flaws and all. As time went by, my connection with Jonathan grew stronger. We shared laughter, tears, and supported each other through thick and thin. I understood that I had found love once more, and that it was possible to move on from my past and discover happiness. I even introduced Jonathan to my parents. Although my parents were warm and welcoming, my father became a bit overprotective of me after my rough patch, during which I nearly lost myself and my life. You know how they say, your past has a way of catching up to you, or that karma has a knack for knocking on your door? Well, what happened during my happy times was a perfect illustration of those sayings. Just when you think all is well, you've healed, moved on, and found true love and happiness. Life throws trials and tribulations in your path. A year later, after I had almost forgotten about the past, I found myself truly happy. My life seemed to be on a perfect trajectory, with business going well and Jonathan by my side. We were deeply in love, and despite the initial hiccup with his proposal, we had grown even closer. Jonathan's patience and understanding had truly shown me that he cherished me for who I was, flaws and all. However, just when I thought everything was falling into place, someone decided to bring my past mistakes to light. It was a shocking and humiliating moment. I couldn't fathom why someone would want to sabotage my happiness. The videos of me dancing on that club's table during the trip with my ex-girlfriends and the intimate picture with the stranger in Dubai were like a punch in the gut. I felt exposed and vulnerable. All the progress I had made in healing and moving on from my past relationship was suddenly in jeopardy. I couldn't help but wonder who would go to such lengths to tarnish my reputation and relationship. Jonathan was understandably taken aback by what he had seen and questioned me about it. I had to explain the context and reassure him of my love and commitment. It was a difficult conversation, but it ultimately brought us even closer together, reaffirming the strength of our bond. But dealing with the fallout from these revelations was challenging. I was faced with the need to confront my past head-on and make amends. It was time to address the mistakes I had made and find a way to move forward, not just for myself, but for the future I envisioned with Jonathan. Jonathan was rightfully upset with me for keeping my history a secret. He ended our relationship, labeling me as deceptive for not sharing my past, while he had been open about his own. I understood his anger, and I couldn't bring myself to beg him to stay. I had vowed not to repeat the same mistakes of clinging desperately to someone like I did with Henry. So I told him plainly that if he wanted to leave, he was free to do so. The only door that remained closed was the one leading to me, begging and pleading. As much as a part of me wished he would have handled things differently and stayed, I couldn't and didn't try to stop him. He explained that he couldn't be with someone who didn't value themselves. And even if he stayed, our relationship would never be the same because he would always associate me with the video and picture from Dubai. It was at that moment I realized that the love, authenticity, and care I thought we had shared were in his eyes fake. It made me question why he couldn't accept me, flaws and all, if he truly cared about me. The fallout from the video and picture extended beyond my personal life. My clients terminated their contracts with me after discovering the content. It was yet another painful and challenging chapter in my life, but I was determined not to regress to my previous state. Instead, I worked tirelessly to demonstrate that my past mistakes did not define my present or future. I was absolutely floored when I discovered that Henry, someone I had once loved deeply, was part of this betrayal. It was a painful revelation that left me questioning everything about our past together. How could he have done something so cruel and vindictive? As I delved deeper into the private investigator's findings, I learned that the other person involved was a former acquaintance of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a shock to find out that they had teamed up with Henry to tarnish my reputation and happiness. With this newfound knowledge, I couldn't help but wonder what their motivations were. Was it out of jealousy, spite, or simply a desire to see me suffer? The reasons remained a mystery, and I was left to grapple with the betrayal of someone I had trusted. Despite the emotional turmoil this revelation brought, it also provided a sense of closure. I finally understood the depths of deceit and manipulation that had been at play. It wasn't just about a momentary lapse in judgment on my part. It was a deliberate act to hurt me. However, I was determined not to let this betrayal define me. I had already come a long way in my journey of self-discovery and healing. Now, armed with the truth about who was responsible for the public humiliation, I felt a renewed sense of strength and resolve. It was time to focus on rebuilding my life, both personally and professionally. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. This experience had taught me that forgiveness and resilience were powerful tools, and I was ready to use them to move forward, leaving the betrayal and negativity behind me. What really hit me hard and left me stunned was when I read the part where he labeled me as a disgrace to women, wishing nothing but pain and suffering upon me, just as he claimed to have suffered when he discovered my video. It was a gut punch, and the public backlash that followed, with people echoing Henry's words, was overwhelming. On the flip side, the individual who posted the picture of my intimate encounter with the guy from the club turned out to be my ex-friend, the very same friend who once had a crush on Henry. I couldn't fathom her motivations. She had already played a part in destroying my relationship once before, so why would she want to repeat it, especially now that Henry and I were no longer together? It seemed like she had an opportunity to be with him, as she had always wished. My dad had always emphasized the importance of not living life to please others and seeking validation from them. He'd remind me that, ultimately, we're born alone, and we die alone, so giving too much attention to what people were saying about me meant I was handing them the power to hurt me. Reacting to every negative comment or post would only empower them to keep trying to bring me down, and they would keep winning. My father's words resonated deeply with me, prompting me to reassess my priorities and how I approached life. I realized that living solely to satisfy others was a futile pursuit because human beings are rarely satisfied. It was time for me to focus on my own happiness and well-being, rather than constantly seeking validation from those around me. If I handed them the stage they craved in my life, they'd persist in attacking me and dredging up my past to tarnish my present. Despite my anger and humiliation, I remained dedicated to running my business. Sure, I lost some clients, but I refused to lose myself this time. I made a promise to myself that I would rise above rather than sink down. Let them say what they want and post whatever they please about me. I wouldn't let them drag me down. Jonathan reached out to me after a month and asked to meet up to discuss our relationship. I allowed him to visit my place, and he apologized for his reaction and that lame excuse. I forgave him, but as for our relationship, I didn't think it would work out. He had revealed himself as unreliable, someone who would flee when things got tough or when he discovered something from my past mistakes. I was content being on my own. Since then, I haven't tried to pursue any relationships. It's just been me and my parents, and I've found immense peace and happiness. Henry later came to my workplace to apologize, but I gave him the same response I gave Jonathan. I'm now living life for myself, and I'm genuinely content without any man. Reflecting on my own past mistake, it taught me the importance of delving deeper into people before letting them into my life and uttering the word love. While I acknowledge my wrongs in the situation with Henry, I wonder if you all think I made the right decision not to fight for him. Do you believe it was wise to let go of Jonathan? I'd greatly appreciate any tips and advice on how to handle such situations. If you find the story interesting, please give me a like and a subscription.